So I think that when we tell the story correctly, which I tried to do, by the way, with Eyes on the Prize. You know, Eyes on the Prize, the first series ends in 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. But we did the second series, which most people don't look at. But you know, the episodes went on. And we understood that it was the first phase of a broader struggle. And I think that we need to do two complex things, and that is, one of them is to recognize the importance of what was accomplished. You know, as I said, destroying the Jim Crow system, you know, what generations we need to recognize.
There are no longer legal barriers to equality in this country.
But then we began another kind of struggle using those rights, and that's where I think we go to Obama today, of still continuing that struggle.
Suzanne, do you think that the major theme, I mean, you said you discovered grievance when you got involved, and it had to do with equal opportunity. It had to do with the ways in which women's lives were allowed to develop. So where do you think 2008? How much has been accomplished?
Well, it's interesting. I was just talking to somebody earlier. I have a 22-year-old daughter. And just to take the example of sports, it is inconceivable to her that when I was playing basketball, we played half court, that when you got your period, you were not allowed to play, and that girls played in a little back gym where nobody came to watch, and that girls dropped off the sports scene. I went to college, there was no basketball team, and it was all over. And I look at the way she sees herself as a young woman and the way she sees the world, and it's an interesting challenge, because on the one hand, women like me are very happy that young women don't see the same barriers that we did. They can speak out, they are proud of their names, they're independent. She goes out and eats in restaurants by herself, which is something I can hardly do. On the other hand, I am certainly aware, although she is not, that there are continuing barriers. To take a cliche, women still earn 73 cents to every dollar that men earn. Women, the whole family system is not supportive of both people being independent. The workplace is totally hostile to family life and sharing and the needs of people to take care of older people and younger people in their families. There's a lot of work to do, but the agenda keeps, you know, it's a moving target. I think the agenda moves where the action is, and as long as a movement, a social justice movement, is dynamic, the issues will continue to emerge, and as long as there are visionaries, the issues will be embraced and explored. But you do need people to name things. If I learned anything in the process of Ms. Magazine, it is essential that if there is a life experience that is making people uncomfortable, if you can give it a name, it suddenly is pinned down and can attract people who want to make change.
Gee, Mark, Encore? Is that our name?
I think it's crucial, and I think the naming of this whole process has taken this revolution already to a stage where we can begin to talk about our revolution.
Dennis, whereas in the case of the women's movement, you can point to all the things that have happened that enabled women to do more and accomplish more, and certainly in the civil rights movement, legislation no longer is. There is no barrier legally to achievement any longer, or shouldn't be. I don't think there is. And Dennis, the biggest accomplishment of the environmental movement over the last 40 years has been to bring people to be aware of just how serious things are. You haven't solved the problems, you've certainly made them more visible. Would you agree with that? Do you think what has the movement succeeded in doing in all these years? I remember when I was at the Washington Post, and every time a story was proposed by somebody about the Arctic cap and the global warming, Mr. Bradley, who wanted to bring down presidents, thought that was ridiculous. That would not happen today. People's awareness of the nature of the problem is extremely acute. So what was the accomplishment of the movement, do you think?
I suspect it's very much like Clay was saying with civil rights. There was a fairly huge initial legislative agenda, and it was accomplished over extraordinary opposition. My group led the lobbying around the Clean Air Act of 1970. We probably spent $250,000 on that. We were opposed really aggressively by the oil industry, the gas industry, the coal industry, the electric utility industry, the automobile industry, and it was just overwhelming. We had what were then the big four, now sort of the slowly disappearing three, have their CEOs come to the Senate and testify that if you pass this piece of legislation, America will swiftly turn into a third world country. And it passed 99-1 in the Senate and by an overwhelming margin in the House as well. And that was followed by the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, the National Resource Conservation Act, and on and on. We've put together a legislative framework, created a context within which a Republican president who was not particularly pro-environment, Ben Bradley perhaps not recognizing that as important, but he insulated himself by creating with an executive order an environmental protection agency.
This was Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Yes.
We had other things about him we were worried about.
There were some other issues out there, yes. And appointing Bill Ruckelshaus, who turned out to be just a terrific person to get all of that stuff launched. So in all of those areas, we have that wave of legislation, all of which was done within 4 years of the first Earth Day, has probably caused well in excess of $1 trillion to be spent differently than it otherwise would have been spent. And because it was all put through a cost-benefit analysis, better than it would otherwise have been spent. That said, and I think it's a fairly impressive legislative and litigation set of accomplishments, the biggest one is probably that now people think of themselves as having a right to a healthy, safe, clean, diverse environment. I mean, it's not a right that's guaranteed any place, but more people recognize it than recognize most of the 10 elements in the Bill of Rights and feel more strongly about it. And within that context, you create something where if you are now running for president at a time when we're enmeshed in a couple of wars and the economy is melting down, one of the cores of that now is to, and it happened on both sides, though Obama was vastly more than McCain, on a platform of creating green jobs that are going to result in the society not just having pumped purchasing power out so that people can buy more, but having pumped it out, creating a more sustainable world. Having said all of that, there's also the environmental part of it that would come back if you ever are interested in a gloom and doom speech. We don't have an economy or a nation that is faintly sustainable or at all replicable. To take just the most obvious example, our little 5% of the world's population consumed 42% of the world's gasoline. Is this a model to be replicated around the planet at a time when we've probably now hit peak oil? Not going to happen. And in area after area, there are just these huge leaps that we need to make. But as with the other two, considering where we were then and where we've come to, yeah, I think there's been some real progress.
So, and this is where I think the questions that have been submitted all are framed in one way or another on this point. The movements that you represent and the successes that they had were an effort to address the wrongs of John Nelson is the person who put the question quite this way. These movements were founded to right the wrongs of oppression or exploitation. How do you think, as we gather here now and as we think about this, because we can't answer the question, it's too big, it's too hard, it's too tough,